When I first joined Greyline Consulting, I was nothing more than a quiet analyst with big dreams and a small desk near the copy machine. I wasn't born into privilege or influence like most of the people in that glass-walled office. Everything I had, every skill, every ounce of experience I'd earned by staying late, reading more, learning faster, and saying less. For the first year, I stayed invisible. And maybe that's why I was so good at my job. I saw things others missed. The cracks in projects, the numbers that didn't add up, the small details that could make or break a client deal. I didn't crave attention. I just wanted respect. And then I met Daniel Shaw. He was one of those people who seemed born for corporate life, smooth-talking, well-dressed with that easy confidence that made everyone believe he belonged in every room. He was a senior consultant, smart, yes, but more charming than competent. People liked him because he made them feel important. I liked him because he noticed me when no one else did. At first, it felt like mentorship. He'd swing by my desk, coffee in hand, and ask about my analysis. He'd say things like, "You've got a sharp mind, Emily, you see the big picture." I won't lie, I admired him. Maybe even trusted him. That trust became the biggest mistake of my career. It started with a project for a major client, a telecom giant about to sign one of the firm's largest contracts. Daniel was leading the pitch, but the entire data model behind it was my work. I had built it from scratch, hundreds of variables, risk analyses, and projections that could make or break the deal. I worked nights, weekends, and even through my birthday, just to make it perfect. The night before the presentation, Daniel stayed late too. We were in the office past midnight, the city lights reflecting off the glass. I remember how he smiled when I showed him the final dashboard. "You've outdone yourself," he said. Seriously, this could change everything. I didn't know then how literal that statement would become. The next morning, I wasn't invited to the client meeting. Daniel told me, "They want just one speaker. It's cleaner that way. But don't worry. I'll make sure they know who did the work." When the email came through from our CEO congratulating Daniel Shaw for his exceptional insights and brilliant data-driven strategy, I froze. My hands went cold on the keyboard. I scrolled through the summary deck attached, my charts, my models, my footnotes. My name wasn't anywhere. At first I thought it was an oversight. I told myself he'll fix it. He'll give me credit internally. But he didn't. Instead, he took the praise with that practiced smile and an arm around my shoulder in front of others, saying, "Couldn't have done it without the team." The team. Not me. Overnight, Daniel became the firm's golden boy. He was invited to executive meetings, featured in internal newsletters, even given a pay raise. And me? I was told to keep supporting him, because as my manager said, he clearly brings out the best in you. Something inside me broke that day. It wasn't just about credit. It was about respect, about being erased by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. I started watching him differently after that. I noticed how he reused my slides for other clients, how he forwarded my reports without even reading them, how he took calls where he repeated my words almost verbatim. Every success he had was built on the work I did quietly in the background. But while Daniel was busy climbing, I started planning. Revenge at first wasn't the goal. It was justice, or maybe self-defense. I wanted him to feel what it was like to be powerless, to have someone take everything you built and call it theirs. Over the next few months, I played my part perfectly. I smiled when he boasted. I laughed at his jokes in meetings. I stayed late to help him prepare for presentations. What he didn't realize was that I was documenting everything: emails, timestamps, file edits, message logs. I created a quiet trail of proof that showed every instance where my work had been stolen or misrepresented. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed the right moment. That moment came 6 months later, when Greyline was preparing for a high-stakes government contract. The proposal would define the firm's reputation for years. Daniel, of course, was leading it. The pressure was enormous and everyone was watching. He asked me to handle the data modeling again. I agreed, pretending enthusiasm. But this time I built something special. On the surface, it looked perfect, just like before. But embedded in the model were certain dependencies and formulas only I understood. If someone used the presentation without me there to explain it, it would eventually lead to contradictions in the projections, errors subtle enough to slip through at first glance. but devastating in a formal review. I stayed up nights fine-tuning it, ensuring it would only break if presented by someone who didn't understand the logic. And Daniel didn't understand logic. He only understood optics. When the day of the final review came, Daniel walked into the boardroom with the same confident grin, my work in his hands once again. I wasn't invited again, but this time I didn't need to be. 2 hours later, the office was buzzing. People were whispering in the halls. By lunchtime, word spread that the government analysts had found significant inconsistencies in Grayline's financial model. The firm lost the bid, millions of dollars gone overnight. Daniel was summoned to the CEO's office. He emerged an hour later, pale and trembling. I remember the way he glanced around the office, confused, desperate, trying to understand what went wrong. For the first time, he didn't have words. That night, as he stayed behind to fix the model, I quietly deleted my backup logs from the shared drive, but not before sending copies to myself into a private inbox I had created under a pseudonym. I wanted to make sure I still had control of the narrative. The next morning, Daniel confronted me. His voice was shaking as he said, "Emily, did you do something to the data?" I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No. You must have misunderstood the model." He stared at me for a long time, trying to read my face. But there was nothing left to read. Over the next few weeks, his reputation crumbled. The CEO lost faith in him. The partners stopped inviting him to meetings. He was demoted quietly, no announcement. Just a new title buried in an internal memo. But I wasn't finished. Revenge is never just about a single strike. It's about dismantling someone the way they dismantled you. Slowly, piece by piece, I started taking on more projects independently, making sure my work was visible to the right people this time. When asked about Daniel, I'd speak kindly but subtly undermine him with phrases like, "He's good with clients, but sometimes struggles with the technical side." People remembered that when the government debacle was mentioned. 6 months later, I was promoted. The office that once ignored me now sought my opinion. My name was finally in those congratulatory emails. But Daniel, he was barely surviving in the background, taking smaller accounts, doing grunt work. The man who once strutted through the office now avoided eye contact with everyone. And yet, even then, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Not yet, just emptiness. Because when someone steals your work, they take more than credit. They take a piece of your self-worth. And taking theirs back doesn't always fill the hole they left behind. One evening, I found him sitting alone in the break room, staring at the vending machine. He looked older somehow, his suit wrinkled, his eyes tired. When he noticed me, he forced a smile. "Guess we both had quite a year," he said quietly. I nodded. "We did." He hesitated, then added, "I know what you did. I can't prove it, but I know." I looked at him, calm and unflinching. "Then I guess you finally understand how it feels when someone takes something that isn't theirs." He didn't reply, just sat there, defeated. That night, as I walked out of the office and looked back through the glass walls, I saw him alone under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by empty coffee cups and old papers. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't, at least not completely. Revenge, I realized, doesn't fix the past. It just balances it. Still, balance was enough for now. And as I walked into the cold evening air, I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where I'd never let anyone take what I built again. Months passed after Daniel's downfall, and the office quietly adjusted to a new normal. His name wasn't spoken much anymore, and when it was with the tone people reserve for cautionary tales. But I saw him every day, still there, still trying. He'd come in early, stay late, keep his head down. Maybe he hoped the firm would forget the government project and give him another chance. But Grayline Consulting never forgets. Not failures, not mistakes, and definitely not public embarrassments. Daniel's desk, once near the corner office, was moved closer to the interns. A symbolic demotion. The man who used to command rooms was now invisible. Irony has a quiet way of delivering justice. Meanwhile, I rose quickly. The partners finally saw my potential, or maybe they just saw that I was the one who could fix what Daniel broke. I took over major accounts, and clients began asking for me by name. The girl who once sat near the copier now had her own office, glass walls and all. Still, I couldn't help noticing him. I'd catch glimpses. Him at the coffee machine, at his desk, sometimes staring blankly at his monitor. He didn't look angry anymore, just hollow. Sometimes I wondered if he'd ever admit what he did. Not to me, but to himself. Because I had stopped needing his apology long ago. What I wanted now was something deeper. Recognition. Vindication. And I got it sooner than expected. One afternoon, our CEO called me into his office. His tone was serious, but there was a hint of admiration in his eyes. "Emily, we're considering you for a director role. But before we make any decisions, I need you to take over the transition team for the upcoming merger project. It's sensitive, high stakes, confidential. I trust you'll handle it carefully. A director role." The words hit me like lightning. I nodded, keeping my composure, but inside I felt something ignite. After everything, I was finally on the verge of the recognition I'd earned. But there was one complication. Daniel was assigned to the same transition team. I remember standing outside the meeting room that first day, watching him walk in, clutching his notebook. He didn't even meet my eyes. We hadn't spoken since that night in the break room, and now fate, or maybe karma, was forcing us to work together again. At first it was awkward but civil. He spoke only when necessary, always polite. I led the meetings, delegated tasks, and subtly made sure his assignments were small but visible. Just enough responsibility to keep him from suspecting anything. But as weeks went on, something changed. Daniel started showing initiative again. He proposed new ideas, some actually good. He was genuinely trying to rebuild himself. And I hated that it made me feel conflicted. Because revenge is easy when the villain stays cruel. It's harder when they start looking human again. Still, I didn't forget what he'd done. Not the sleepless nights, not the humiliation of being erased from my own work. I reminded myself that he hadn't apologized, hadn't confessed. Whatever he was doing now, it wasn't redemption. It was survival. But redemption or not, he made one mistake. He trusted me again. One evening, we stayed late preparing a joint presentation for the merger board. It was the kind of high-level meeting that could make or break careers. He was nervous but hopeful. "If this goes well," he said quietly, "maybe they'll start to see me differently again." I looked at him across the table and smiled faintly. Maybe. The next day, I saw my opportunity. The presentation was due in final form before the weekend. We were both responsible for submitting it, but I had the final say. Daniel had contributed some strong points this time. His first genuine effort in months. But I noticed something subtle in the file metadata. He'd accidentally left traces of an older data sheet in the version he sent me, something slightly off. A small discrepancy, but enough to question his attention to detail. I didn't correct it. I simply forwarded the version to the partners as final, with both our names attached. During the review meeting, one of the executives pointed out the inconsistency. Daniel immediately took responsibility, apologizing, trying to explain that it was a minor oversight. The partners didn't look impressed. They glanced at me expecting my reaction. I sighed softly as if disappointed but composed. I reviewed the file late last night. I assumed it was intentional, but clearly it wasn't. "We'll fix it immediately," that was all it took. The partner's trust in Daniel evaporated again. After the meeting, he came to my office, eyes burning with quiet rage. "You knew," he said. "You knew that error would get noticed." I looked up calmly. "You're responsible for your own work, Daniel." He clenched his jaw. "You got what you wanted, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He turned to leave, then stopped. "You're not better than me, Emily. You just learned to play dirtier." Maybe he was right. But the corporate world doesn't reward morality. It rewards survival. And I had survived. The following month, I was officially promoted to Director of Data Strategy. The announcement went company-wide. My name on the headline, my photo next to the CEO's. My story framed as one of resilience and innovation. It should have been perfect. But then something unexpected happened. A journalist reached out to me, a reporter covering women in corporate leadership. She wanted to feature me in a piece about overcoming bias and recognition. I agreed, flattered and excited. During the interview, she asked me to describe a moment when I'd been overlooked and how I handled it. I told her about Daniel, carefully without names, how my work was once stolen, how I rose despite it. She listened intently, but later she reached out again with a question. "Emily, someone named Daniel Shaw contacted me." He said he used to work with you at Greyline. He claims your story isn't what it seems. Care to comment? For a moment I couldn't breathe. I hadn't expected him to go public. I stayed calm, of course. I denied any wrongdoing, framed it as professional jealousy. The firm backed me. I was too valuable now. The article published with my version as the headline. Daniel's side was mentioned briefly, dismissed as a bitter ex-employee's attempt at relevance. Still, it rattled me. For days I couldn't shake the feeling that the victory was cracking around the edges, because in truth he wasn't lying entirely. He had taken my credit, yes, but I had taken his career and more, and deep down I knew that neither of us came out clean. A few weeks later, Daniel resigned. Quietly, without farewell drinks or announcements. Just an email sent at midnight. To those I've worked with, thank you for the lessons. It's time for a fresh start. He left the city soon after. Some said he went to a smaller firm. Others said he freelanced abroad. I didn't ask. I didn't need to know. But his departure left a strange silence behind. For years I'd built my ambition around what he'd done to me. Now that he was gone, the rivalry vanished. And so did the fire that had fueled me for so long. It's a strange thing, to win and still feel haunted. One night, I stayed late again, like I used to in the early days. The office was quiet, the city lights flickering through the glass. I opened an old folder on my computer, the one labeled Initial Models. Inside were the first spreadsheets I'd ever built for Greyline, the ones Daniel had stolen years ago. I stared at the formulas, the rows of numbers, and suddenly I remembered why I'd started all this, not for power, not for revenge, but because I loved solving problems. I loved making sense of chaos. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost that. I closed the folder, leaned back, and laughed softly at myself. Revenge had given me victory, but not peace. A few weeks later, during a board meeting, I found myself defending a younger analyst who'd been overlooked for her contribution. A shy girl named Priya. The partners were praising her manager for a report I knew she'd written. I interrupted politely but firmly. Actually, I think Priya deserves credit for that analysis. Her approach was impressive. The partners nodded. Priya looked stunned, then grateful. As I watched her expression, I realized something. That single gesture, the act of giving credit where it's due, felt better than any revenge I'd ever taken. Daniel's shadow finally disappeared that day. Years later, I heard about him again by accident. A LinkedIn post shared by a mutual contact. He'd started his own small consulting firm, focused on community projects and ethical leadership. His face looked different, older, calmer, maybe wiser. I stared at the post for a long time. Then, without really thinking, I liked it. He never responded, never followed back. And that was fine. Because by then I had already made peace with our story. Revenge isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's transformation, turning the pain they gave you into power, and the power into purpose. When someone takes your credit, you can fight to take theirs back, or you can become someone who doesn't need to. I chose both. And when I walk into my office now, years later, with people greeting me by name, I don't think about Daniel Shaw anymore. I think about that quiet analyst I used to be, the one sitting by the copier, invisible but burning with potential. She got everything she wanted, not because she took it from someone else, but because she finally believed she deserved it.